Hello and welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Annalise Klingbeil.
I'm Leah Ward.
I'm Shannon Phillips.
Welcome. We've got lots to talk about today. Podcast news. You two like podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Occasionally. Joe Rogan. Have either of you listened?
You know, I actually feel like I should more. There's sort of like
just
an
in general,
automatic...
in life in general, you think you should
in
listen
general,
more
I need
to
more
Joe Rogan.
Rogan in my life.
Who among us does not, Leah?
We all need a little Joe. No, I really think like there's conversations that happen there that have, and I mean, I think that's where we're going, that have an influence on our political and social discourse. And I think it's easy to, like, in this kind of time where media is so fragmented and there are so many different platforms and we can exist so easily in our own little universes, it's really easy to miss out on what else is happening and what is feeding the different types of media and narrative ecosystems. So that's a long answer to not much, and probably I should listen to it more.
Listen to it more. So, Shannon, do you have a gift for Leah and I? Is there something you'd
brought
like to
you
present
both
us?
a
pink
See,
one.
These are 10-pound kettlebells. Mine
not
are pink.
70.
One's
These are
pink. One's
two
blue.
colors.
I got them at Superstore.
Yeah.
Very special
Canadian
kettlebells, because now we bring these things to podcasts.
Shannon moved them
to look, like swole and masculine. This is the point, apparently, of political communications, is we bring kettlebells and
just pump those up.
demonstrate
I'm really into
feats
this.
of strength while we podcast and talk about politics. It's
Shannon,
just
would
so
you-
fucking stupid.
They're right behind me.
Would you say,
isn't it?
Would you say you're a kettlebell freak? Because Pierre Poilievre,
I'm not.
Twice in 4 minutes, the first 5 minutes of the Joe Rogan podcast, which I listened to, twice in 4 minutes, he said that he was a kettlebell freak. You're not. You just have them.
I would just like to point out how ridiculous a woman would sound referring to herself as a kettlebell freak, particularly someone who was competing for the highest office in the land. Like, it's just, it defies imagination because it would never happen. The whole thing is idiotic.
I've been saying kettlebell, not
good form,
kettlebell.
good
I'm
form.
not even saying the right word.
I think kettleball is probably something else that no one should Google. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the other
We're
podcast.
absolutely certain he said kettlebell.
Yeah, I think he did. There was a lot going on in the 5 minutes that I watched. Did you know, Leah, the reason Poilievre got into politics was because he got tendinitis, because he was working so hard as a high school athlete. Did you know this?
No, I didn't know that. I feel like I read the
learned
book
some
on
things.
him.
Oh, well.
I didn't know that.
First 5 minutes, Joe Rogan, you can hear it there. Let's talk a little bit about this before we get into the important things that we will talk about today. Leah, who do you think who was this interview for? I mean, it happened. A lot of people, obviously, Joe Rogan, #1 podcast in America. Lots of people listen that way. There was a lot of media coverage here. Who do you think this was for?
Like everyone. For that reason, it's not just the #1 podcast in the United States. It is also the #1 podcast in Canada and the world, I think. So the listenership is absolutely insane. He reaches everyone, particularly, as we know, with his kettlebell usage, young men, who is the fastest growing supporter base for him. It was also for Donald Trump in the last election. The ability of the sort of far right to attract men between 18 and 34 is pretty intense right now. And those are the people who are listening to Joe Rogan all over the world. So if I were advising Pierre Poilievre right now, I would also have put him on that show. It's incredible reach.
Would you have put him on that show in a suit?
It's not the best for lifting, I'll say,
Shannon, who do you think it's for?
I think it's for young men. And I also think that it is for his base, whether that's even narrowly or even broadly defined. It is to reassure people who support him already. Like, whenever you're doing communications, I think you should always be asking yourself, who is this for? And usually you're answering that question with, am I reassuring the people who like me already, or am I trying to make a relationship with people that I would like to like me? And I think in this case, what he's trying to do is say, this is for reassuring the people who already like me that even though I'm here being mildly critical of Donald Trump without ever saying his name, like it was like the wimp's way out for sure. But even still, I can trust him because there's so much coding going on with appearing on Rogan, right? And so I think it was about reassuring his own people. If you're asking yourself, who do I need to get elected? Well, if I'm Mr. Poilievre, I need to keep the 18 to 34 men, but around who I've have seen some erosion, and we had Kyla Fitch on the podcast to talk about it. But I need to make friends with boomers. It is not clear to me at all that we're doing that with this. I think with this, we are saying it's okay. I'm around for the long haul, caucus, party members, other people who are looking at that 20-point gap.
But
it's also the earned media he got from it, right? Like, especially as a Canadian going down there, it's less routine or mundane or everyday. So, like, we're talking about it. There's been pretty much every pundit panel this week has done segments on the analysis of these questions. Who was he talking to? Was it worth it? Did he get what he wanted from it? Why?
Nobody brought a kettlebell.
Exactly. Shannon Phillips.
10 whole pink pounds of power.
Look it. Pump that up.
Anyways.
Look at that.
Fresh takes is what we promise people.
It's what
Fresh takes and hot goss.
I do think there's something on this that is important.
Tell
two.
us.
Number one, Carney, he launched his whole campaign for leadership basically from the Jon Stewart show, right?
Yep.
When you go down and talk to Americans, you're speaking back to Canadians because we always have this thing where if the Americans are talking about you, then you feel more important than if it's just the Canadians. So I think there was that, number one. Number two, all politicians, regardless of whether they're talking about kettlebell stupidity or MMA or other nonsense, need to learn how to do long form in talking about something other than politics. And that's where, Kamala really fell down. She couldn't come across as a real person because she couldn't go do Rogan because she couldn't just float through some of the anti-vax or whatever horse shittery that he would throw at her and just talk like a normie.
That's a good point, Shannon, because it's like long form, like over 2 hours that even 5-10 years ago, I feel like politicians just wouldn't touch it. You'd be like, you can't, no, you cannot hold that conversation for that long. And it's becoming more and more of a thing. And as you say, we saw that going into the election. That's a good point.
And one of the biggest knocks against him for that particular audience is that he's a career politician. So kind of to your point, the ability to sit down and hang out with him for 2 hours and hear him talk about lifting and, other things that he cares about is important to round him out as a character, because we've only ever known him in Canada as this chirpy, precocious at first when he was younger, kind of political,
dweeb
I don't know,
is the word you're looking for. Dweeb. Dweeb is the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think he looks like a dweeb to me.
Well, the suit.
Even after the makeover, hold on. Sorry, you have important questions, Annalise. But even after his makeover, he still looks like a dweeb to you?
Well, he just looks like a try-hard dweeb to me now.
That's the worst kind of dweeb. Try-hard dweeb. Leah, talk a little bit just before we wrap this up, about that image that, from the comms issues management point of view, prepping the leader for a 2+ hour interview, and the thought, what gifts are we going to bring to present? How are we going to hit it off the top? What do we want to hit? How do we also practice being normal? Should we wear a suit? Should we wear a shirt to show off our muscles? There's a lot that goes into this. Talk to us about that.
Yes, I would be thinking of all of those things. I think in a 2 hour, you don't want to, there's always a risk when you're prepping for an interview, particularly a long form one, that you overscript or you get too in someone's head. But as a staffer, it's also your job to make sure that they're well prepared and that they don't, there's no surprises and that they don't accidentally say something outrageous like they're a kettlebell freak. But
twice in 4 minutes.
But it's like there's a balance. So you want to sort of map out, which is what I would probably do in a situation like this. I would try to map out the conversation. I would make very clear, like, these are the top points we want to get across. And then usually what I'll do is like, what are your ins? So like moments that you can use to pull the conversation into those top points so that you have like in the back of your head a few sort of like triggers almost. I would probably do that. I would also probably like talk about what we absolutely don't want to come out of your mouth. In this case, the name Trump, I suppose. They made a decision to keep the knock it off line, which I think is very interesting. It's such a smarmy, like immature take on it. I'm shocked that actually that one didn't get tossed. I mean, he swore, right? So he added a swear word to it.
But like, honestly, like it did not go down a year ago at all and made him sound like a Trump supplicant. So I'm not sure why we, dusted it back off. But there it is, right? It's obviously in him, and that's what he wants to say. Because if it's still there a year later, it's because that's what he thinks, and he thinks that's a compelling line.
Absolutely.
So it's the long form is so interesting, and then to the point, media covers it. We all saw clips all over social media on it, but like it's not a tight 20 minutes. You could like you could tell. I mean, I watched the first 5 minutes and I saw the clips on social. He seemed quite nervous at the beginning, but then a lot of the other clips that you get comfortable, right? You can draw, and I know from being on that other side as a journalist previously, right? You can draw people in the longer that you chat with them for. So it's interesting. Any final thoughts?
Did you ever use the trick where you just like stop talking and let the other person fill the awkward silence and say things they might not otherwise?
All the time. Not even intentionally, but just, hey, taking a second to gather my thoughts. It's funny watching this, not that it's at all the same, but I did a podcast years ago when I was covering City Hall, and I felt like when I interviewed city councilors, they were so stiff. So I was like, let's do things that show your personality. So it was like, let's go for a bike ride with the councilor who's against bike lanes. Let's go for a tour of the suburbs with the councilor who thinks suburbs are great. And as soon as you got them doing something other than like a traditional reporter, city councilor interaction, they were, they're real people, right? Like they were so not stiff. So it was great.
That's a great idea. That's some good
Those
reporting,
are always so
Annalise.
fraught, though, right? And they're fraught
Totally.
from the politician perspective for good reason, because historically, these sorts of long-form things were designed to get you, to put you in a corner, to make you say something, to make
you.
more news, to humiliate you in some way, to, give gifts to your enemies. So I don't blame politicians for pushing back on that stuff at all and going into their safe space of, Joe Rogan and MMA and whatever, because I think that in many ways, like the regular way of doing media was designed to take you out of being normal, generally, right? It was designed because you had to put up that big defense wall, or, people are going to take what you say out of context. Like, for example, the Avi Lewis War Room and me. So there you go. Anyway, moving on.
Let's wrap that one up there, Shannon.
You just had that ready?
It just came to mind as I was thinking about things that piss me off. Yeah.
Do you want to do one more pump of those kettlebells, Shannon?
Got it.
We're gonna there we go. There we go. Just breathe through it. We are going to move on.
Did we just become a bro podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. With our
kettlebells.
baby blue Superstore kettlebell.
Yeah, that I was calling the wrong name 15 minutes ago. We're going to move into a deep dive. We are going to call this Ward's World.
Ward's World! Ward's World! Party time! Excellent!
I don't think I'm cool enough to live up to that segment music, but here we go. So before I get into this, we're talking about the anti-trans legislation in Alberta, but also I'm going to touch on sort of what we're seeing across the country. And I will inevitably forget things or, say less on things I could elaborate on. And I can already feel myself after the pod thinking about all the things I wish I had said. So If our listeners have questions or want to hear more, then tell me. Also, hopefully I get it all right. I'm like not exactly an expert in this. I did write my master's paper on an earlier version of this in 2009. The Alberta government actually delisted gender affirming surgery and then relisted it again in 2012. And I wrote about sort of the activism and the policy decisions around that time. So I have been following this for a while, but a lot has happened since. So let's start with this week. The Supreme Court of Canada is hearing a case about religious symbols in Quebec. So on its face, it doesn't have anything to do with what's happening in Alberta or Saskatchewan or anywhere else in the country. But the question underneath is a bigger one. It is about, pardon me, when a government decides to override rights with the use of the notwithstanding clause, is there really any check left, or is it just politics now? And that matters because what we've been seeing over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, particularly when it comes to queer and trans rights in Canada, specifically in Alberta. So I'll come back to that, but if you want to understand how we got here, it actually didn't start in a courtroom. It started in libraries. At least that's where I'm starting the story.
Yeah. Take us there.
You remember this, Annalise? In like early 2023, there was drag storytime events across Canada started getting disrupted. So there was one in Calgary where a reading was stormed mid-event. There were families inside. People were shouting slurs. They had to call the cops. I think I saw news as recently as this week about charges related to that event or that series of events. It was happening kind of across Canada and the United States. There were a lot of news reports about these kinds of disruptions in Coquitlam. They needed police escorts to get into the library. In Edmonton, there were protesters outside, like yelling at kids. It was gross, but it was pretty pervasive. And it was like a flashpoint, right? Like these events had been happening more quietly for years. The drag storytime, I mean, not necessarily the protests. But there was this like all of a sudden sort of what seemed like a spontaneous sort of eruption. So I'm calling that...
In Southern Alberta, it felt like the convoy was giving itself something more to do after it was done in 2022. It was like, at least from what I saw, because I went to one of the counter protests, it seemed like it was the same people.
It was. Yep. Yeah, it definitely was. There's some and I'll talk about it a bit later. There's some direct links to similar groups in the United States that are actually traceable. It's a little less in Canada, but that's absolutely connected. That year, and this is where those connections become more visible, you get the 1 Million March for Children events that were happening. And this was not just a handful of protests. This was a coordinated national day of action that spanned at least 9 provinces, over 20 cities. They had the same branding, the same messaging, the same framing. There were sort of 2 main national organizations that were sort of the organizing hubs of it. They focused on like protecting children and parental rights, more focused on like curriculum because they were targeting schools. I went to one of these and it was really ugly. Like
One
really
in Edmonton was massive.
Yeah.
What happened to the one you were at?
I think it probably happened everywhere. Like the police had to come in to keep the counter protest was larger, much than the March for Children folks, and the rhetoric was just so disgusting. Like I remember we were trying to block them basically from getting to the school where the kids were in school. And so we were kind of like linked arms and sort of wrapped ourselves around a block. And they were, just the things that they would yell. And I remember being like, my arm was linked with a transgender diverse kid who had shown up to do this thing. And like they were being called a groomer and a pedophile and like, ugly. And the police were violent with like mostly people on our side. Anyway, this is where I think you start seeing a bit of a shift. It stopped being just about these sort of like flashpoint drag events and became about schools. And once the issue moved into schools, it got political because now there were policies to change, rules that could get rewritten. There was actually something concrete that governments could actually act on. And they did. So New Brunswick moved first. This was again in 23. They revised Policy 713, it was called, which required parental consent for name and pronoun changes. This will sound familiar. Premier Blaine Higgs at the time put this change in slightly before there was an election there, and you could kind of see politics forming around it. So there were anti-trans flyers were being distributed. The issue was being pushed into communities, into schools. The campaign featured it, which is interesting because it lines up with what researchers in the States have been tracking as well, in terms of seeing that issue specifically get pulled into electoral politics, where it relies on sort of a small number of actors and networks that take an issue that's not very well understood. The sort of gay lib movement did a lot for basic understandings of gayness, queerness even. But when it comes to gender diversity and trans stuff, it's still very poorly understood.
It's not really rooted in equal legal rights in the same way. There are some, right? Human rights protections and so on. But it would seem to me that on gender diversity, you're looking at a lot more than just a basic equality protection, right? You're looking at healthcare,
there's not as many access
identity.
Points there. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just it's newer. It's not newer in that the experience of trans, but the way that we talk about it and the visibility and all of that, it's just a newer conversation.
So, but in New Brunswick, they were doing this in 2024. But in Alberta, they had been already successful with it, in my view anyway, in 2023, which in some ways is kind of a test case for it, of the sort of positive rounding to the benefit, at least, of conservative actors in the system. Because I certainly saw it in 2023, where it definitely polarized certain segments of the electorate. Even people that I would have expected that it wouldn't have sort of quote unquote worked on. And it did turn up the volume, coming as it did right after that whatever that thing was called, march. And we really saw those sort of anti-trans, anti-gender diversity, school-based conversations being pumped into the electorate in 2023. And then so Blaine Higgs tries to do it again in 24, but got his ass handed to him. And it also, it did make up a lot of the conversation in 24 in BC in a really polarized way during the fall of 24 election too.
I was there for that. Yeah, I was in the BC NDP war room, and it was a huge issue. And you're not wrong. It was all happening around the same time, which is weird, right? It's rare that we don't typically see that the specificity of language of the issue as replicable or as replicated as that happening in communities all across the States and all across Canada in provinces sort of simultaneously. It's strange, and that speaks to the way that the playbook had been established and then imported and then just replicated. And like you say, it is conservative politicians who are picking that playbook up and just executing on it. So we saw, there was New Brunswick. Yep, it didn't work. And it was in 24, actually, it got reversed because they lost the election. The voters were not having it. But then there's the Saskatchewan example. Yeah, there was the stuff happening in Alberta.
They tried, but by all accounts, well, maybe it helped in the rural seats, I'm not sure. But by all accounts, Scott Moe kind of stepped away from all of that afterwards. So it's not clear his electoral
It is
benefit.
interesting to see it fail electorally. Arguably, you could say it also failed in BC, where they tried using the same tactic. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's still animating the Conservative leadership race.
Yeah, because it's polarizing. And so polarizing issues do animate. that's why this has been so effective. I think what's interesting too about the speed, so not only the coordination of it, but the speed, as you say, is, and you know this probably better than anybody, like normally major policy shifts come after like years of, research, advocacy, changes in professional standards or medical guidance. If we're talking about stuff in healthcare, there's often a gradual shift in public opinion that politicians and parties will be tracking to sort of know where to get in on something or what they might be interested in changing. I mean, even when we think about the evolution of gender affirming care to begin with, it took decades. Like it took decades just to remove the requirement that you see a psychiatrist specifically, not just like any mental health practitioner, but a psychiatrist specifically in order to get a referral for any type of gender affirming care, particularly surgery. Decades to remove that. In fact, the UCP put it back in. Shannon, actually, I was trying to find a reference to when that requirement was removed, and I think it was us in government. Do you remember?
I don't.
I should have just texted Sarah. I'm pretty sure it was, because when I wrote my master, the timing suggests it was in that phase. In any case, they put it back, the requirement, which
could have been before us, right? Like we did the Bill of Rights piece and that kind of stuff, but some of those health matters were actually resolved in that between 09 and 12 period. So in
2012 when Redford put put the funding back in place.
I just want to put and give credit where credit is due. But I can't remember.
Yeah, so we'll leave that to our listeners. Someone will tell us, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Here, like we're seeing the sequence dramatically compressed, right? So we like drag protests emerge in 2023. Then there's this march that is sort of like a shift happens there in terms of moving it from sort of flashpoint into policy changes, which then happen within months, basically, which, tells you something different is driving it. So, if we look at that in terms of a Canadian timeline, it does not exist in a vacuum. In the States, anti-trans, anti-drag mobilization had been directly tied to white nationalist, Christian nationalist, far-right organizations, including groups like the Proud Boys, alongside, a political project that was rooted in, among many things, but reinforcing traditional gender roles as one of its core goals. In Canada, those connections are a little more diffuse. Of course, Proud Boys were designated a terrorist group and quote unquote disbanded. So we don't have any evidence linking them to the connections here, but we do see the same characters, the same leaders that emerged during the convoy. This is what you were bringing up, Shannon, show up again here. So what becomes established looking at the sort of the coordination, at least, or it's not a explicit coordination, but they're mirror campaigns, is just that. It's this evolution of a playbook that is framed around protecting children and parental rights and these sort of overlapping networks of mobilization and tactics that get sort of refined and polished as they continue to move on this project. And that's kind of how it works. We see it in Canada, we see it in the States, we see it in Europe, in Belgium. In, again, 2023, there was almost an identical Protect Children messaging campaign around sex education, protests, misinformation campaigns. There was like a case of arson in a school. Once that playbook is established, those narratives travel really, really quickly. They're right out there to see, and they're available for governments or political parties to pick them up and run with it. And then you get the clearest example of how this plays out in practice in Alberta. I think we really went for gold. Mm-hmm. So passing 3 bills, 27, 26, and 29, so covering schools, healthcare, and sports, like all at once. On healthcare, doctors are prohibited from providing puberty blockers or hormone therapy to youth under 16. Shannon, you have teenagers. When do people typically hit puberty?
Boys hit it later than girls, famously. And you could start seeing the BO and the acne start to sprout at around 12, 13, I'd say. That is normal.
Well underway by 16. I
Leah,
think we could say.
can you clear up for me what taking a puberty blocker actually does? Because Danielle Smith told me it's irreversible.
Right. That's a lie. It is this makes me crazy. Like I want to like shred my skin with a cheese grater crazy because it's the opposite. Like all of the claims they're making are the opposite. And so the thing that you do to buy trans kids time to figure themselves out is you allow them to delay puberty. Do you know what's not reversible? Fucking puberty. You can't ungrow an Adam's apple. You have to surgically remove breasts if you grow them. You can't re-narrow your hips. These things are permanent. The kindest, most generous, least invasive thing we could possibly do, even if we were to accept the idea that these kids don't know who they are, is to give them the time to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And that's what this government has taken away. Further effects of these bills, and we know them, I'm just, for the record and for the conversation, the puberty blockers is a big piece of it. There's the parental consent at 16 for the use of a different name or pronouns.
So is that 16 and under? So if my 17-year-old goes to school and says, okay, social studies teacher, it's they, them now, that's fine. But if they're under 16, they have to notify me?
Well, this is where we should probably have brought an expert in because I think it's 16 and 17 I think it's the
they're
under
allowed
18.
to. They're not. Okay. So we're even because there's some things that you're allowed to do at 16, 17 in terms of medical choices and so on, like independent of parents, right? Like there's been all this litigation around vaccination and that kind of stuff that kids actually can access that. Yeah, birth control, abortion even, like that's been litigated in Canadian context. And so I guess that's probably part of the notwithstanding clause piece of that particular legislation is that it cuts off those kids' ability to access those kinds of like individual liberties that other kids
under 18
can access. Yeah.
Based on protected ground, right? Like it's only because of their gender
That's
identity.
why you need it to override that reading in of section 15, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the sports one. So it would restrict any trans girls and women from competing in female categories. So another coordinated shift across multiple systems shaping how young people live and to your point, how they live in relation to their peers and what they have access to and what they don't. And we started doing this a little bit, but I will do some clarification here because I think, to your point, gender affirming care is widely misunderstood. And, for young kids, there's no medical treatment. Like what happens is, and I have a little trans niece and she's so damn cute and happy. And she changed her name. We call her she. She wears dresses when she wants to. And that's kind of it. And she's just happy. Like, she's just a happy little girl.
Gender affirming care is social, not pharmaceutical.
Yeah. At first, when they're little. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it. Medical care comes in a bit later and it's typically slow. So, before anything like hormones would be considered, my God, you would go through multiple assessments. You would be talking to specialists and doctors. You would be required, if you weren't seeking it out already, to have mental health support. There are extremely long wait lists for these things. Like, this is not a fast process. When I was getting top surgery, it was 2 years before I got the call to book an appointment to get assessed, to then get out. Like, it's absurd, right? Like, these timelines are extremely long. And then, of course, there's the lies about puberty blockers and the absolute infuriating reversal of logic there. I can't handle it. So they are reversible. They are understood to be quite safe. They are designed to create time and not force decisions, actually. And there's something else about the logic of this argument that makes me nuts. If you think about, if we were to protect kids from doing things that are like irreversible or cause irreversible harm, we probably shouldn't let them play basketball because you could tear your ACL. Most people do. And that's like gonna stick with you all your life, you know? Like we should never let anyone diet because you're going to fuck your metabolism forever. So like absolutely no diets. That should be made illegal. You know, like there are so many things that are much more damaging that we just accept.
So those things are prescribed for a whole bunch of other reasons, like precocious puberty, for example. So you're limiting the scope of a physician's ability to meet the needs of a wide diversity of people because people are actually not carbon copies of one another. And we have a number of different pharmaceutical interventions that we use all the time to help them.
Well,
for all kinds
in the case of precocious
reasons.
Puberty, if you're a cis kid, you would presumably still have access to that. Like that's what makes this so
discriminatory,
offensive and discriminatory is that, yes, you're right. Like there are lots of reasons and we don't question the sort of like the long-term effects of it in an instance where you might have, you know, an 8-year-old starting to show signs of puberty. We block that shit because that's too much.
But Leah, they tell me all the time, I read all the time, at least for the argumentation of this, that there are people accessing treatments such as surgeries for kids under 18 or under 16 that shouldn't be accessing those surgeries. It would seem to me that that's probably false, but that is also a real moral panic out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it. So there's nobody does surgeries under 18 for bottom surgery, which is what we would call like genital, like vaginoplasty, phalloplasty. That does not happen under 18. It usually, like there's more there too, because usually that happens in Montreal. If you're Canadian, you have to, or if you're in Alberta for sure, that's where they send people. You have to get pre-approved to have that paid for. You have to pay, there's a lot of costs that you have to pay yourself wrapped around that. All of your travel, all of the coordinating of getting there and taking care of yourself while you've had major surgery. Of course, there's a lot of other things in a surgical transition like that. Like, you know, if you might need a tracheal shave to soften an Adam's apple, or like hair removal or vocal training, or, you know, there's a host of things that make those transitions successful that are not covered. So first of all, no, it doesn't happen underage. And the process of getting there is it's a hard road for the people who actually do. There are some very, very rare cases of top surgery happening under 18. And this is, I think, one of the things that we get hung up on in the sort of pro-trans camp is that we can't just say that's not true, right? It is virtually untrue. But because there is like a rare 0.01% who might be lucky enough to have been in care for a long enough period of time and have access and have gotten through the wait list and all of the different gatekeeping steps, that they get it before their 18th birthday. And those are lucky, lucky kids. It's very rare.
What do you think the political reason for this all coming at the same time, and what purpose does it serve for conservatives? Because, I mean, for a long time, you know, there was a purpose served in fighting against same-sex marriage, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside. What kind of replacement is this in the political zeitgeist? Why is it being used by everyone?
You know, I don't like the idea of sort of describing these incredibly deliberate and precisely executed strategies as a distraction, because they are deliberate. They also do take attention away from other things. So, I mean, we saw that with the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, where that was raging in public discourse. They undid a ton of like environmental protections, and like the whole bunch of stuff in the background got wiped out while nobody was looking. So, you know, I would never discount that as helpful to them in terms of why they might lean into things like this. I think there's also I'm going to give a multifaceted answer. I don't think it's one thing. I think it is also a way to create us and thems. Not they thems. Well, yeah, they thems can be over in the thems. It's helpful to these kind of like pro-nationalist projects to have very clear insider groups and outsider groups. It also creates new coalitions of people. So you saw like in the convoy, it brought together parents and in some cases newcomer communities, religious communities, and got them organized around a particular issue that you know, there might not have been a reason to bring those groups together and create political power. So it does that. There's a lot of functions. It also does something to how we understand healthcare. And this is where you see abortion activists and queer and trans activists coming together in moments like this, because what's happening here is that and in fact, everyone should be worried about this.
Talk us through this.
The government has, pardon?
Talk us through this. The unlikely pair.
The government has moved a conversation from a clinical setting, individuals and their doctor or care provider, into the political sphere. And that is precisely the place where things like abortion get repealed. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Section 7, which is our right to life, liberty, and security of the person. That was the section that was found to have been impugned by our previous abortion laws, which was that you had to go to a panel of male doctors to ask them pretty please for an abortion. And the court struck that down, saying, no, that is an infringement on your security of the person, your individual liberty, and your freedom to have a relationship of confidentiality and trust with your physician. And that is exactly what is being overridden here as well. It's the same struggle.
It's the same struggle. Key to Canada's abortion law is actually the absence of law. So abortion is not in law other than the Canada Health Act in Canada. It makes Canada a gold star for abortion rights and access in the world. And this directly undermines that strength. If abortion existed in the criminal code, it would be easy to pull it out, right? Like if it existed, even progressive governments who have tried to put in laws to further entrench the right to abortion activists ask them not to because it makes it more fragile, right? So the thing that anti-abortion activists have had such a hard time with in Canada, and the reason that we haven't experienced a Roe v. Wade situation is because it's so diffused into our healthcare system. It is healthcare. Yeah. So this kind of a move that takes it out of healthcare, that says this is no longer a decision that you get to make in the privacy and security and trusting environment between you and your doctor, is now a decision that the government will make for you. That's the template they need.
I have two questions, Leah. One is I'd like to argue with myself because I just said that this politics is working. Why is it working? But actually, is it?
Is it?
Because Blaine Higgs lost the election. Scott Moe backed away from it. It didn't work in BC. Doug Ford, as near as I can tell, hasn't really touched these kinds of culture wars with the 10-foot pole, although you're closer to it than I am. Does it work? Is it working? Is it only going to be in the hellscape that is Alberta where it, quote unquote, works?
I think I have the same question. I was sitting with that as I was getting ready for this episode. And I think it is worth noting that it has not worked in all of those places, which is heartening, actually. Like, that feels better to me in terms of the world we're in. So I think what's kind of interesting about the use of the notwithstanding clause, which is present in most of those examples, except for not in BC, is when it, like up until very recently, when governments used it, like, first of all, it was very rare. And second of all, it was politically costly.
Yeah.
Right. And so where that continues to be true, I think, that's a good sign. I don't know that in Alberta it will be politically costly. Like, I don't know. It doesn't, we don't have enough information. I've looked at polls, there's been some public polling. There's some people who've done private polling that have shared it with me.
Yeah, I've seen some too.
Nothing is super helpful.
No.
There's a couple of things that surface. One of them is that this issue in Alberta is profoundly polarizing, and it doesn't necessarily track along party lines. Kind of, right? Like more of the people who oppose trans affirming care or supporting trans people are conservative, and more of the people who support it are NDP. But there's more overlap than you might think. Largely, I think, because of misinformation, disinformation. But the argument around parental rights is so effective and so compelling. And it's really hard to counter it with like, well, it's complicated and like, you don't really deserve rights as a parent because, we want to protect the rights of kids. And like, to ask a parent who believes they have a right to that, whether they do or not technically, but you're asking them to admit that they're not, that their kid needs to be protected from them.
Yeah.
Right. Like what parent?
That's exactly right.
that?
What parent
Thinks that?
or you're also asking in a world that feels like it has we've completely lost control of it. I don't know what my kid is consuming in their phone day in and day out. I don't know what kinds of messages. I don't understand half of their Gen Alpha brain rot words, right? So you're asking me as a parent then to relinquish what kinds of control that I absolutely know that I probably have, which is, how my kid's gender identity and healthcare, right? And you're telling me that I don't that's how those messages are interpreted. So
right.
I can't remember what my other question was, Leah, because all this talk of women's health just reminded me that I'm a perimenopausal woman and I forget things. But what's the kind of to this point though of it's effective because even as a progressive parent, you can I don't agree with the arguments that the right makes, but I can understand where they come from.
Yeah.
What are the arguments in the framing that you find the most compelling? Then, in order to make a case for, life, liberty, and security of the person for trans people in this country?
So both I think we don't know, and there's some things showing up in the States. So to your point, we have seen this fail electorally in Canada in a number of instances. That's telling. There's some research in the States that shows tactics used specifically to counter anti-trans attacks in election campaigns that are effective include, and this will not be surprising to you, reorienting around shared value. And so when you can move people back into a place of shared belief and community, it does sort of disintegrate that intense polarization that we're seeing. I think in Alberta, we have not seen a strong counter campaign. And a lot of that is because, there's a lot of reasons. A lot of the people who are opposing this are doing frontline service delivery and they're nonprofits who are funded by government and can't do that kind of political advocacy, even if they had the unrestricted funds to do it.
There's no civil society outside of that frontline civil service delivery from my vantage point anyway. I could be wrong in this space, but it seems to me that that there's no independent voices, right? There's academics, there's a few advocates, but it's the people who are unencumbered, find them for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's part of it. I also think just the simplicity of their argument is so, and that's where you see it cross political lines, because most parents, and this has been my advice around messaging, is parents want to know that their kids are okay. Everyone wants to know that, right? That's the starting point.
Yeah.
And then you build from there. Okay, everybody, we don't have to argue over the supremacy of parents' rights over kids' rights, or whether or not it is true that puberty blockers are reversible or irreversible, or any of the other lies, damn lies and fucking lies that the UCP and our premier say about this issue. We can't debate those things. Overwhelmingly, the medical and professional expertise, scientific evidence, research findings all support gender-affirming care as both safe and life-saving and medically necessary. That is the truth. these forces who are funding, organizing, and sustaining the anti-trans attacks that we're seeing in all across the world are also producing counter studies. They have their own experts popping up in order to confuse that for us, because then we get stuck in this debate over who's right and who's wrong. Campaigns that do this effectively move us away from that debate and into a space where we can mostly agree on things. It's not super clear.
Get the government out of your clinic room, get or the examination room, get the government out of the way of your right as a parent to be able to make decisions for your kids. Yeah. Have you seen
it looks
any
more like
a focus grouping or anything like that on that, or stuff
no.
from the States? It would seem to me that if there's strong ground to be on in Alberta, it's that piece of parents' actual freedom to make decisions and individuals' right to make decisions. I don't know.
I agree. That's my gut. I've also heard that reflected from service providers like frontline organizations who are talking to families about this issue. That is emerging as the thing that gets people the most incensed about the changes. And that actually does cross demographic lines and party lines. So yes, I think that's it. There is no research to prove it. One of the other challenges, I think, with the polling that we've seen, or any like knowledge we have of where public sentiment is on this, is it is absent a campaign.
That's right.
Because we haven't done the work to push back and recenter the argument. These polls don't tell us very much, actually.
What about too, Leah? I always go in from the comms angle, the people, right? Put the people first. And when we had Dr. Bronwyn Bragg on, she talked about that too with the immigration stuff, right? Like, tell the stories, put the people first. This is an area where that is harder because the people and the stories are like. Can you speak to that aspect of it?
Sure. I mean, so in the case the case from Alberta that's going before the Supreme Court, the one where Egal Canada and Skipping Stone are pushing back on those 3 bills we were talking about earlier, there are 5 families that have joined it also. So they are sort of surfacing those real lived experiences. Generally, though, I think in terms of like a campaign or public messaging around it, I think, and this again is gut, that to draw the conversation into the individual actually reinforces the idea that these are freaks or like aberrant, that they're abominations. Because I mean, look, like I'm a queer trans person, so I say this lovingly, but if you get a group of us together, like, we look like freaks often, right? Like, everyone has a different color hair. We're wearing like amazing, bizarre outfits. It is one of the most beautiful things about my community is that there is a liberation and an embracing of people being exactly who they are.
Seems like it's the point.
But it's exactly the point. And I love it. I love it. So I really say that affectionately. And now I'm going to be a political communicator and say that's not helpful right now. Like, you're all very beautiful, and like, I don't think that it does anything for creating a shared sense of values and seeing ourselves, right? Because it's a small community and they don't tend to look like everyone else usually.
An interesting point. There was a podcast, this was like years and years ago, where the podcast was basically this mom who had I wish I remember what it was called, had a child who was presenting differently. And the podcast was just her talking about it. She'd just be like, here's an update. Here's what my 6-year-old is experiencing. What should I do? This is what's going through my head. And it was like fascinating. It just came out kind of whenever she had time and would talk about, my kid went to school and this happened and now we're going to do this. And this is a small community I live in. And just like, this was long before I had kids, but just hearing that like love from a mom who's just like, this is what my kid's going through and I want the best for them. And there's no one around me and I'm just going to put it out on the internet. But it's like to draw someone into stories like that is hard from a storytelling point of view.
No, it is hard. And I mean, before I get hate mail from my own community here, like, to be clear, Like those stories are powerful. Always want to see story. The narrative infrastructure for those stories doesn't exist right now. And so I think the first step is to not, the risk for me is that it further entrenches the idea that we can discard them as other. And I think the first thing that needs to happen is that we remind each other that we all believe in the same thing. The thing about those kinds of stories that I love too is that most parents, this also gets borne out in research, most parents are going to do an okay job. Like most parents are going to figure it out. Even the ones that, might resist or don't understand it or are confused by it. Like most parents love their kid and they're going to figure it out. Some of them will not. And those are the kids that we're worried about.
Yeah,
right?
that's who it's about.
We do make laws for the people who do not. Right. And that is why we have protection of minority rights. That is why we have a criminal code. It's not for those of us who are not. It is for those of us who walk over the line. And that is why we have the protections that we do. And we don't normally allow governments to override them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not exactly a soundbite. Like parental rights. It takes a lot longer to get there, but we can.
It requires us Poindexters to go out and hector people about the rule of law, which is not exactly a thing they want to talk about. And so that's the challenge. But, I often wonder what these liberation movements are going to look like in 5 years. Leah, do you think it'll come back around? Do you think that, because we've already seen a massive backlash, right? Like we've seen rights move to a certain point. Now we are seeing a backlash, but we have seen over the long period of history, liberation movements come and go and gain things and lose things. Where do you think the trans liberation movement is what do you think it's going to look like in 5 years?
5 years might be a bit.
Maybe that's
I don't
short.
know.
I don't know. Try 10
years.
I don't know. Yeah. On an unlivable planet. What's the trans liberation movement going to be like on an unlivable planet?
That's right. We're not going to be worried about it because
we're all going to just be Mad Maxing.
What you're saying is like the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice, right? Mm-hmm. So
do we still believe that's true?
You're trying to be hopeful, Shannon.
Think it's true?
Look at you.
I'm trying. Do you think it's true, Leah?
I do think it's true. I do. I do think it's true. That is my life's project. I think it's true. I think that, it's funny for you, not funny, haha, but to put it in a 5-year frame, because I think this period of time is going to be really hard on the trans community. Mm-hmm. I think people will die. We are already seeing tremendous increases in hate crimes and violence, declining mental health, suicidality. These are the consequences that we face with these kinds of backlashes. So that'll happen first, and we'll get it back, I'm sure.
Leah, what can people listening, I think you've done a great job of kind of going through the history where we're at now. And I always bring it back to people. What can people listening do? How can they help? Is there messaging that works? Is there things they can do in terms of staying up to date on the case that you mentioned? What can people listening do?
That's always a bit tough. I think, sure, follow it, look at the stories that come forward and, see the humanity in it. I think, what I would love the most is for people to just talk to each other. When we get to know each other, when we understand each other in community, when lines of communication are open, these things get much easier and we get more invested in the well-being of our communities. These types of polarizing debates harm communities too, right? They make it more awkward to talk to each other in public. They make it more awkward to, go to small events in your community. It makes it harder to put your kids in sports. My God, even for non-trans kids,
it's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, talk to each other, I guess, is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would have.
In the small community I live in, there are ways to essentially, if you're, just a random cis-het person going about your life, there are ways that you can go about your life that are ways that you can express solidarity with an extremely small trans community and LGBTQ2IS plus community more broadly. You can attend events. You can, every time you see some horrible thing that the government has done, you can give a little bit of money to Skipping Stone or others. You can go to Pride Fest. Just take your kids. You can do these kinds of, sometimes there's the drag brunches, and then there's, they're still doing drag story time hour, even in, little ass Lethbridge. They do them in other places too. You can go to those things and just be another, basically another NPC of the community, but, and just show up for that community. Even in just being there, you are essentially creating a space around an extremely small and identifiable group, to Leah's point, that doesn't always have, clearly doesn't have the protection of, quote unquote, the rest of us right now in terms of our constitutional framework and our legal framework. So I think in every community in this province, even in Alberta, especially in Alberta, there's lots of these type of events and so on. And even if you're not out trans person, if you go to these events and you see all these other folks there, you're going to feel a lot more like you belong, and that you can follow the journey that, life's kind of set out for you. And you can feel like you might have friends and you'll be okay.
Yeah, you're here.
Leah, anything else that you want to add or say on the wards world? You've done a wonderful job.
No, I mean, I was going to return quickly to the notwithstanding clause argument where we kind of started, and maybe I'll just briefly wrap up there and steal the beautiful moment that Shannon gave us. Yes, please donate to queer organizations. They are struggling and they need your help. I think what becomes important to focus on here too is also the ways, like the risks to everyone. And, as we know, the notwithstanding clause gives governments the power to pass laws that violate certain charter rights and that prevents the courts from striking them down for a period of up to 5 years, right? Or of 5 years. And what's happening in Quebec, in the Quebec question right now that is relevant in the Alberta case, in fact, Egal Canada, who is intervening in Alberta, is also intervening in this Quebec case for this specific reason. The court is being asked two pretty specific things. Are there limits on how governments can use this power? And do the courts have any type of role, or could they have any role once it's used? Right now, you can enact the notwithstanding clause, which is to restrict charter rights, but you don't have to say which ones. There's no requirement there. And so one of the questions they're asking is, should it be the case that if the notwithstanding clause is enacted, that the courts still review the legislation, even if they don't overturn it? Like, that they would still look at it, examine it, review it, write a decision on it, so that it becomes then clear what exactly was the trade-off, right? It creates like a bit of a public record, because without that, you're not just actually overriding people's rights, you're also removing like the ability to tell anybody what happened.
Yeah.
The idea is, and we hear this from Mickey Amory talking about like, well, this is the most democratic way we can do it because we are the most accountable to the voters. But they don't know what you did, dude. Like, what are we, if we're punishing you for this, what are we punishing you for? I can tell you what I think it is. I mean, you've cited sections that are like easy to point to in terms of what's been violated here. But it's an interesting question then to say, like, if the logic here is that there is a form of accountability, well, like, is there?
Valid question.
At the end of the day, on the notwithstanding clause, like, what's the solution? The solution is the streets, like on both the labor and the trans bills, right? That labor, when they had their charter right to withdraw labor and to take collective action taken away from them, there was only one solution, which was to defy. And, the government has just said, let's make this political, not legal. Okay, that's the one way to do it. And I think we've lost the art of taking to the streets because we don't get the satisfaction off it anymore because we don't have a media to amplify our actions. But at some point, that's going to have to be what it is because there is no other redress.
You, Shannon?
Okay, I got to go back. I got to go, you guys. I'm done. I got a workout to do.
Pump those kettlebells. Do you have more props hiding on your desk, Shannon?
No, just a bunch of half-used notebooks.
Okay. Let's wrap it up there with Shannon
I really
pumping
need my kettlebells.
those kettlebells.
You've been listening to Balance of Power Pod. You can reach us at suggestionbox@balanceofpowerpod.ca. We always want to hear what you have to say. Our tech production is by Haxum. Our content production assistant is Sydney Whiting. And our music is by Shayla Miller.